and welcome to today's webinar, What Drives Consumer Trust? Fostering Authentic Connections. My name is Cheryl Auger, Senior Director here at Lux Research, and I'm going to moderate today's session. I'm so excited to introduce my amazing colleagues, Elena Gorchanova, one of our fantastic analysts, and Derek Gingrich, our product manager here at Lux. Now, a couple of housekeeping items before we get into our insights. Throughout the webinar today, you are encouraged to type your questions into the question box on your screen. Time permitting, we will answer as many questions as possible. But don't worry, if your question does not get answered, please don't hesitate to reach out to us through email at questions@luxresearchinc.com. That's questions@luxresearchinc.com, and you'll hear from us. If at any point you experience technical difficulties, like a frozen screen, please refresh your browser and check that your internet connection is strong. Now with that, let's jump into today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. Today we're going to be talking about how to drive consumer trust and build those strong connections with your consumers. We're going to do that in a couple steps. First, we're going to look at why trust is important and why we've chosen trust as an important topic to talk about together today. Then we're going to look at how you can build trust around some of those key, what I'm calling belief segments, but you can really just think of them as those key topics where consumers often lose or gain trust. Think things like price, value, their communities, that sort of thing. And then we're just going to talk about some takeaways and why it's so important to factor how your decisions, your presentations, and your authentic expression of your brand factor into how consumers think about your brand and build trust. Now, why are we talking about trust today? Well, increasingly, more than any other time in recent history, trust is getting harder and harder to earn, right? Multiple studies have shown that upwards of one in three consumers nowadays say that they're not loyal to any brand. They don't trust any brand, and they're willing to change brands quickly. And even among that remaining 2/3, overall trust indicators are lower, and they report trusting fewer brands than consumers in the past. At the same time, though trust is so much harder to build, trust is also a lot easier to lose. And the stakes can be pretty high. When you lose trust, the results can be quite devastating and cataclysmic. On the worst case scenarios, you can think of things like massive reductions in foot traffic, product launch failures. But that's not the normal, that's not what we usually experience when we have a trust loss. And we're actually going to be focusing pretty heavily on another scenario, what I call the transformation of a loyal consumer into a disloyal consumer. And I want to explore that with a personal example. That's myself. So a time that I lost trust in a company was when I was shopping at TJ Maxx. And I saw a jacket that I was really, really taken by. It said it was normally $100, on sale for $50, sweet 50% off sticker. But that sticker was on pretty loose, so I peeked under and I saw that the original price was actually $70. Now, this discrepancy, the fact that I was being lied to, immediately shattered how I understood this interaction, right? I had trusted TJ Maxx to be bringing me the best deals and to being honest about those deals. And suddenly I realized that wasn't the case. Now, I love to get a good deal. I love to find a good price on my clothes. So I still shop at TJ Maxx, but now I'm always looking for other options. I'm thinking of other places I can go to. I went from being a loyal shopping there to a disloyal shopper, always looking to replace them. And as soon as I find a better option, I'm going to. Now, I'd like to turn it over to my brilliant colleague, Elena, who's going to do a little bit of an ethnographic analysis of me to tell me what we can learn as anthropologists about my buying behaviors.
Thanks, Derek. I know we've all had an experience like that. It might seem like a minor annoyance. On the surface, it's a pricing gimmick. But as anthropologists, as Derek said, we see something much deeper. A direct violation of the core belief the consumer holds about themselves, but also about the brands that they buy from. So about themselves, consumers believe that they're savvy, they're not easily fooled, they know how to spot a real deal. And about the brands that they buy from, they believe that they're a partner in that savviness. They help them confirm what they already know about themselves, that they're discerning, practical, and in control. So when a sticker says that a price is reduced by 50%, but it's actually not, it doesn't just trigger skepticism. Going back to that store would undermine the belief that Derek has, that consumers have about themselves, that they're smart shoppers, because they know that the brand or store is looking to fool them, to manipulate them, to get them in some way. So this is not something that Derek or many other people or consumers would be willing to do. So as Derek was saying, in a world where consumers are overloaded with information and primed to be skeptical, trust is incredibly hard to earn and easy to lose if brands undermine those core beliefs that consumers have about themselves or about the companies they purchase from. So all of this to say, belief is the trust equation. If brands affirm consumer beliefs, like the fact that they're savvy shoppers, they can spot a good deal, they earn their trust. But if they undermine them, they lose that loyalty and that trust that Derek was talking about. So in this session, we'll dive into a range of such powerful consumer beliefs and see how brands can tap into them to create more meaningful connections with their consumers. So to kick things off, I'll hand it over to Derek for our first example. Take it over, Derek.
Yeah, so just to reiterate the importance here, my current behavior of shopping at TJ Maxx, that's fleeting, right? I'm doing that because, as Ellen said, it really affirms some deeper, stable beliefs I have. And it's so important to understand those beliefs because now that fleetingness is much more acute. I'm looking to shop elsewhere. And it's really that clash with my beliefs that caused that rapid trust loss. And it's going to be very hard to build my trust back. Another example of this that I think is really great to elucidate how we can tease apart beliefs at scale to understand an interesting problem around trust is Google. Now, I love the example of when Google introduced AI search because whenever I bring this example up to people, I'm met with more or less the exact same reaction, which is some version of Google search is so bad right now, or Google search is so much worse than it used to be. And everyone first mentions the AI search. And that's really was the moment that really drove home to them how unreliable maybe Google search was becoming. So I have an example here on the screen of one of these acute moments where a consumer is just searching how to prevent cheese from sliding off their pizza. And the Google AI's first recommendation is mixing 1/8 cup of glue into the cheese so it sticks. Now, on social media and on sites like Reddit and other link aggregators, people were sharing what they saw as the funniest, most ridiculous examples of how the AI search was giving them terrible results. And that always led to a follow-up conversation of, Google hasn't been as good since there was paid results at the top. Google hasn't been as good since they've been trying to push me to shopping and images and all these other elements, right? This belief that this was just a crystallization that really just let them give voice and let them actually point to a very hyper-specific example of something they already felt bubbling, and that is that their trust in Google results was dropping. Now, Google still dominates the search market, of course, and that's why they're such an interesting example, because what Google has done is they've turned loyal users into disloyal users. In our conversation data, we see just a massive increase in interest in Google alternatives. And Google is also such an interesting case study because they were so dominant, they became a verb. They became a part of our cultural lexicon. We just say we're going to Google something when we're going to search the internet. Most brands aren't in a position like this where they're so integrated into our culture that they become a word this way, but Google is. So they're a fascinating dive into how trust is built around what a brand does and what consumers believe about themselves when they're interacting with a brand. So Elena, can you unpack the belief systems undergirding Google's AI search response?
Yeah, absolutely, Derek. So let's move on to our next slide and use this language map that built on conversational data we have about Google to unpack what consumers actually believe Google does best, which is ultimately why they trust it, and why an AI rollout may not be aligned with those beliefs and lead to a loss of trust ultimately. So as Derek was saying, right at the center, we see Google something as a verb, the start of 90% or more of consumer information journeys. And stemming out of Google something, we see nodes like useful information, first link, main page, AI results cluster around that behavior. So this reflects what Google likely saw and interpreted as a demand for faster, cleaner, and more efficient answers. And in this context, when we're just looking at surface level behaviors, an AI rollout makes sense. But at this stage, it's important for brands to dig deeper. Yes, people use Google, but we need to know why, because that belief will shape how they respond to new features, innovations, marketing campaigns. In other words, when companies understand what people believe about them, they can better forecast how they will respond to new things they're trying to introduce. So let's dive deeper into our language map to get at that belief. So when we look at that useful information node, we see it branches out into nodes like simple search, but then it goes into nodes like accurate information and ultimately YouTube guide, reliable sources, and forum posts. And this is where that core belief lies. It makes it evident that people believe that what Google does best, what makes it the most useful, is connecting them to human experts. And that's why they trust it. Even when we follow the path from AI results, we see conversations around asking GPT and concerns around it being an accurate slop and the need for human experts. In other words, features that enhance that human element and align with consumer beliefs about what makes Google useful might fare a lot better. So to sum it up, trust isn't built on brand name alone. It's built on whether a brand consistently lives up to people's beliefs and expectations. People don't trust Google just because it's Google. They trust it when it aligns with their beliefs that it should connect them to real answers from real people. When it doesn't align with those beliefs about what makes it useful, and when it eliminates the human out of the loop, they lose that trust. And with that, I'll hand it over to Derek for our next example, this time about consumers' evolving beliefs around price and value.
Yeah, so what Elena just showed us with that language map, I love looking at these problems using that demonstrative lens, where it really makes it clear how belief systems branch off from those kind of surface level findings, right? If you dig deeper, you can see how the different beliefs are interacting. Now, obviously, that was just about 15 different topics that consumers are talking about for demonstrative purposes. But whenever we're using our tools, we're looking at literally thousands of topics, and we're analyzing thousands of interactions between ideas to dig into these beliefs. For the next two examples, we're going to, instead of those language maps, just be showing the sort of conversational summaries and those themes of conversations you get from our virtual anthropologist tool, as well as the motivations, attitudes, values, and fears, those kind of deep human components of belief that you often find in all of our syndicated report or our custom ethnographies. And at first, we're going to kind of showcase this method and how you can use our tools to really understand belief and trust by talking about price and value. Now, I think one of the lead themes we see of when consumers are having conversations about price and value is not going to surprise anyone here, I don't think. And that is the fear that inflation is currently being used as a justification for greedy price hikes, right? There's this deep-seated belief that companies are always looking at economic forces and other things that they can use as scapegoats to increase their prices, kind of sneak a little extra money out of the consumers. And there's really a deep-seated distrust in pricing strategies. You see here this amalgamated verbatim that is capturing the sort of things the consumers are saying in our conversation data. You have this note that every time inflation is mentioned, prices go up. I feel like companies are just using it as an excuse. But we also see another interesting theme of conversation around transparency and how consumers are also talking about when there's clear, transparent reasons behind a price hike, not just sort of an indication towards inflation, they're more likely to at least understand and accept its necessity. Here we see a consumer talking about appreciating it when there's explanations as to why prices are going up. But recent examples where we see this playing out in consumer conversations directly is around when brands or online storefronts have been announcing various policies in relation to the what portion of a price increase comes from like what specific tariff policy, for example. This inventorying of reasons behind price increases, consumers talk about trusting these price hikes because then they can see actually what amount of price hike is coming from a change in policy, or maybe even you could think of what amount of a price hike is coming from some sort of supply chain change, that sort of thing. Now, this is what consumers are talking about. You know, we have a good sense of there's this kind of underlying distrust, there's this desire for transparency. But what we like to do whenever we're digging deep into a research project is also to get into things like the kind of deep underlying attitudes that are driving consumers to talk like this in the first place and take these stances. And what we find in this context are two really interesting attitudes that are a little in tension with each other, or at least expose kind of a path forward navigating consumers' belief systems. You can think of this analogous to the language map Elena showed, where there was the two different branching paths. So on one hand, we see this attitude around how corporations always misinform consumers. It's just in their nature. There's everything from product labels to advertising to, yes, pricing are just different ways that corporations can deliberately hide facts and trick consumers. But we also have this interesting attitude among these consumers that quality and price are positively related. In other words, quality doesn't come cheap. Quality is worth a price increase. Now, what's interesting about that is we see all of this distrust around price increases. We see all this distrust around price, but there's this one kind of shining beacon where price and quality are positively hand in hand. And we can actually use this underlying attitude to understand how consumers have recently reacted to things like price hikes or size reductions. So I want to look at a specific example of the latter, and that is Cadbury's UK shrinkflation problems. So in 2024, Cadbury reduced the multi-pack weight of their chocolates by 22% in order to keep the prices unchanged. Now, we can understand conceptually why Mondelez probably made a decision like this. They probably decided it was more important to protect the price point for their consumers than it was to protect the size. And due to inflation or other forces, they needed to kind of pick between these two. But what they experienced was an immediate backlash from consumers. And digging into consumer conversations around multiplex and chocolate, what we find is that a big component of quality is size. In fact, the most dominant quality consumers are often looking for in a multi-pack is size. That is the quality they're after. So from a consumer perspective, what they saw in this instance was a drop in quality without the price dropping at the same time. Or in other words, a drop in quality while price was staying the same. This shrinkflation was actually perceived as a sneaky way to reduce the quality of a product that these consumers have come to rely on, to successfully make sure that they have a snack every day of the week, or that they can give a chocolate bar to every member of their family, or any another use case. Now, Mondelez responded to this controversy by explaining how they needed to reduce the size in order to protect the price, and they didn't want to hit their customers' wallets, so they decided this was the only way they could make sure that their customers could still afford the product. But from the customer's perspective, the effect was the opposite. They saw an unexplained, sneaky reduction in quality. Now, the core belief that was being really contradicted here was consumers' belief that they knew how to, give themselves or their family high quality chocolate. Here, quality meaning size and frequency. They were able to protect those qualities as a shopper, and then Mondelez undermined that belief. Now, I'm going to turn it back to Elena to look at how businesses can interact with various subcultures and look at also an example of a company that actually builds trust successfully.
Thanks, Derek. It is striking how shrinkflation can erode trust. And I think in addition to the beliefs about quality that you identified, it also goes back to the beginning of our presentation and the beliefs that consumers have about themselves being savvy shoppers, able to identify a good deal. So they see themselves as smart and savvy. And when they notice shrinkflation, it feels like an attempt to outsmart them. But from there, our next example leads us into the world of subcultures. And by subculture, we mean people who organize their identity around a shared hobby or passion. In gaming, there's the subculture of speedrunning, players obsessed with finishing games as fast as possible. Outside of gaming, you'll find things like sneakerheads tracking every limited drop. And so what we want to understand here is how can brands enter these spaces without disrupting the beliefs and needs that hold them together? So when we turn to our data, we start to see a very clear belief system at work in these subcultures. Consumers don't just see these spaces, whether online or offline, as entertainment. They see them as authentic communities, places where they can find real connection with like-minded individuals, spaces where their identity, passion, and expertise are recognized and respected. And because of that, they are skeptical of brands stepping into these environments. At the same time, though, it is important to recognize that consumers in these subcultures aren't closed off to commercial content or outside participation. In fact, they're incredibly open to content from small creators and often to the brands that support or serve as patrons of the arts to those creators. In other words, they believe that when brands participate in these spaces, they should spotlight talent, foster creativity, and really support those communities. So digging a little bit deeper into their underlying attitudes in these spaces that tie to those core beliefs that we were talking about, we see two main attitudes emerge. So consumers want to think that they don't fall for marketing gimmicks from brands that don't belong or care about their communities. And they want to think that they can instead make well thought out decisions with their product choices and support the subcultures they belong to. So if it feels like an outsider forcing its way in, people notice it's superficial and they tune out fast. So when Heinz dropped a fueling station into Call of Duty, it might have sounded like a playful activation in theory, but in practice, it disrupted the experience. So Call of Duty is a game about high stakes combat, fast reactions, and intense immersive gameplay. Not exactly the kind of space where players are thinking about snack breaks. And Heinz also didn't tie the activation to small streamers or recognized community culture. They just placed a product. So they clashed with the core belief that brands should truly understand and support the community, not just show up to sell. So instead of that, consumers want brand experiences that feel intentional, that feel like the brand enhanced that authentic community-based experience. They want their choices to feel thoughtful, like they're rooted in product function that supports their gameplay, and not like they're being manipulated by brands to buy their products, just because there was a hyped up marketing campaign or product. And a brand that's done this really, really well, including in gaming subcultures, is Red Bull, because it taps directly into those beliefs within gaming subcultures that we were talking about. And it does so through two main strategies. First, instead of forcing relevance with some new gamer branded product, they leaned into what they already had, which makes them seem more genuine. Their core product already contains ingredients like taurine, caffeine, and B vitamins, ingredients gamers already associate with focus, energy, and performance. So now they're confident that when they're choosing Red Bull, they're not just getting caught up in the hype, but they're choosing products in a careful, discerning way. And Red Bull didn't stop there. They showed up in a way that supports the community, rather than taking attention away from it. They boosted small creators, championed indie developers, and they ultimately put a spotlight on the people that make these spaces that they love vibrant. So it didn't just advertise to gamers, it contributed to the culture that they so valued. It aligns with their beliefs the brand should support and nurture this community spirit. So overall, building trust requires understanding consumer beliefs and then meeting the needs that those beliefs expose. Whether it's beliefs consumers have about themselves as shoppers, about subcultures, or about the brands they turn to. And now I'll turn it over to Derek for the key takeaways.
Thanks, Elena. So before we dive into the key takeaways, I just want to reset the stakes here. So in all of the case studies we looked at today, what we're really pointing to is the fact that these businesses transformed loyal consumers into disloyal consumers, right? They transformed that person who's happy to go to Google to that person who is checking out DuckDuckGo for the first time ever, or Bing. They've transformed me, happy shopper at TJ Maxx, to someone who is starting to look at alternative options, thrift stores and alternative discount stores, including pushing me to like investigate maybe online spaces where I wouldn't have been comfortable shopping before. And in cases like Cadbury, you're turning the consumer who doesn't even think about it and grabs the same multi-pack every grocery trip into someone who's maybe comparing the multi-pack now to the store brand or alternative offerings and trying to rethink what way they can meet the qualities they need for their family. So turning someone to a disloyal consumer might not have an immediate cataclysmic effect. Of course, that is also possible, but often instead it's you push someone to start shopping around, someone to look for a replacement, at which time it's only a matter of time before their behavior changes, before they find something that they feel like aligns with their beliefs better. Now, the key takeaways is sort of the recipe on how to approach this problem. And the first key takeaway is that you should always make sure that you're aligning with consumer beliefs and not building your strategy around some other thing like demographics or income bands, but really thinking about what beliefs drive your consumer to shop with you, to buy your product, or to use your services. Once you have a really good, thorough understanding of your consumer beliefs or the beliefs of a consumer in like a subculture you're interested in, then you need to make sure that those beliefs are shaping how you communicate, because the consumers are using their beliefs to interpret your communications. One thing I like to always point out here is that your innovation decisions are a part of your communication, right? It's not just your advertising campaigns and your social media, but what you decide to innovate on, what products and paths you decide to pursue also communicate a lot of things about who you are to your consumers. So it's all communication from a consumer's perspective, and everything you do and say is communicating your beliefs, and consumers are reading it through their beliefs. And then finally, just messaging to match beliefs isn't enough. Performative messaging doesn't work. Consumers are savvy. They're looking for evidence, and they want to see what you say matched by what you do, or otherwise, when they realize that's not true, the Derek peeking under the discount sticker moment, you're going to push that consumer away and lose trust. And finally, we're just going to end on some action items. These are things that our clients can do today to start putting these ideas into practice. And first, it's mapping consumer beliefs using a virtual anthropologist. If you're interested in a subculture, you're interested in what consumers think about your category, it's a quick search, very easy. Second, you want to make sure that you're embedding and communicating those beliefs across your communication and your innovation pipeline. We offer a lot of elements to help you with that, be it downloads from our virtual anthropologist or metrics like our maturity curve and zone of innovation that really help you communicate how stable beliefs are and where they sit in the landscape. Third, you should always be exploring adjacent belief systems to find those cultures that you already fit in. Red Bull, as Elena pointed to, is great at this. They find cultures that exist out there where the beliefs and desires already align with who Red Bull is, and then Red Bull just enters and engages in a space authentically that already aligns with them. And finally, although beliefs do change slowly, you should still always monitor beliefs for changes because major events can cause beliefs to drift, realign, or move, and trends can be shared or move among groups. And so you just want to make sure you're staying proactive on top of changes in belief systems.
Amazing.
That, thank you.
Sorry to cut you off there.
No.
Thank you so much, Derek and Elena. That was an amazing presentation, incredibly insightful. For the audience, we're going to start taking questions. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and type your questions into our question box. Again, if we don't get a chance to answer your question right now, someone from Lux will be in touch after the webinar. So I do know we have a couple that came through. Let's see. Let me take a look. Okay, here's a really good one. They say this was very insightful. They found your examples in particular really helpful in bringing to light your ideas. And they're wondering, do you have any other examples where you think it's really important for brands or companies to build trust?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think there's so many different spaces where it's important. At the risk of opening a can of worms at the end of a presentation, I think one of the other areas where it's really important to do this is around anything related to corporate social responsibility or corporate social positioning. So how you are engaging with different social groups or social trends in the world. We can think of, like, for example, someone who's very good at navigating this. It would be an interesting case study on building trust effectively is someone like Costco, who's very good at navigating and building trust around things like diversity initiatives and DEI and stuff like that. And we can think of looking to examples of where companies are less successful. And really, it can be either positively engaging or deciding not to engage with these trends. Both say something. And understanding the belief systems that currently draw consumers to you can give you a lot of insight into how your actions may be read by your current customer base.
Thank you. All right. I think we have time for one more, and it kind of builds a little bit on what you said in a way. And this question is, what does it take for a brand to be seen as authentic in a divisive environment? So lots of curiosity around that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a fantastic question. So I think what it takes is for a brand to know who they are, regardless of which way the wind may blow. And it's really about not trying to please everyone, but knowing your core consumer who's been loyal to you. We've talked a lot about loyalty in this presentation, and sticking to your core brand values and messaging instead of flip-flopping. Often what we find is that when brands try to appease everyone, they end up appeasing no one. They might be at the risk of really alienating core consumers without really bringing in anyone new. So yeah, I think the core message here is to know what your brand stands for and to kind of stick to that regardless of the external pressures.
Yeah, that reminds me a little bit about our findings around divisiveness in our 5 key trends report that we kicked off the year with, which may also be interesting to the folks asking those questions. Yeah, but great answer. So I think we're at time. So again, if we didn't get a chance to answer your question, not to worry, someone will reach out. But that concludes our webinar for today. The slide presentation and recording from the session will be sent to all of the attendees via email later today. After the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a survey on our presentation. We'd really appreciate any feedback that you might have to help inform and improve our future webinars. Furthermore, take a minute, check out our upcoming webinars. We have a lot of good stuff coming your way. But for now, thanks so much for joining us and have a great day.